Welcome back to The Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you once again for joining me. So, in honor of my most anticipated movie of the year coming out soon, that is Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, I wanted to go back and review the two previous renditions of this movie. And last week, I put out a video on my channel reviewing the classic film from 1922, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror. And today, I wanted to follow that up with the version from 1979. This is Nosferatu the Vampyre, directed by Werner Herzog. This is a film that I had seen before previously and quite enjoyed it based on my memory of it, but it had been quite a while since I had seen it last, and so I was very curious to see it again and see how well it held up. So, got some thoughts here for you. Let's get into it.
Last night, after a tiresome journey, I finally reached my destination, the castle of Count Dracula.
In Nosferatu the Vampyre, Count Dracula moves from Transylvania to Wismar, spreading the Black Plague across the land. Only a woman pure of heart can bring an end to his reign of terror. And I'm happy to say that this film held up quite well for me personally, as I largely enjoyed this all over again. And if there was ever an opening sequence that nearly perfectly establishes the mood and the atmosphere and the tone of the movie, it's gotta be this one, as this film opens with a montage of mummified bodies. And let me tell you, it is genuinely one of the creepiest things I've seen. The score playing underneath it and the visuals of these partially decomposed and mummified corpses, let me tell you, man, that is quite the way to start off this film. One of the things that I like what Herzog does in this is clearly, parts of it are clearly an homage to the original film from 1922, where there are very similar, nearly identical shots. And so Herzog is trying to be, respectful and again pay homage to that original film, which is an all-time classic. But he also adds enough of his own flavor and style in there, and so it doesn't feel like it's a complete, copy or shot-for-shot remake. And so I like that there's some nods to the original film, but then Herzog kind of brings his own thing, and this feels too like its own kind of fresh adaptation based off of the original book. And there are two main highlights to Nosferatu the Vampyre. The first one is the atmosphere of this film. Let me tell you, this film is just dripping with atmosphere. Some of the best atmosphere I think I've seen. It's fantastic. This movie maintains such a solid and consistent vibe and tone throughout all of it. It's just one of those films that, like, there are movies that you watch just to kind of have this experience, this sort of feeling, where movies give you this certain vibe, this certain atmosphere, and it's kind of hard to explain exactly what that is, but they just give you this feeling that you really just enjoy watching it because of how it makes you feel. This is one of those movies. The atmosphere here is so intense and so thick. It's creepy, it's eerie, it's unsettling, but it's sustained so well throughout the entire film that it just makes such a great and rewarding experience. This film, too, is also, it's also a German film, which the original film happens to be, but it's also reminiscent of, like, German Expressionism. And this was a film movement in Germany in the 1920s that really emphasized kind of over-exaggerated and theatrical production values and set design. They are more kind of exaggerated theatrical set pieces, very intense imagery, very high contrast lighting and shadows, to sort of represent the kind of inner struggle and turmoil of the characters, and we're kind of setting aside, literalism and realism, things like that. And this version of Nosferatu is clearly inspired by that as well. This is a film that when Harker embarks on his journey and eventually arrives at Dracula's castle, there is almost this kind of supernatural-ish element here. There are some hints along the way that give you this thought and idea that he's almost kind of entering into this sort of shadow realm, this sort of phantom, shadow, supernatural type realm at once he gets to the castle, where things are not happening in a very realistic way. There's kind of this sort of heightened expressionistic type of reality. And I really like that approach that Herzog had, where this is a film that at times it feels almost dreamlike or nightmarish kind of thing. It's a film that feels almost like a fable. It feels like it's a dark fairy tale. And I just really like that, this sort of dark fairy tale with a vampire, and it's film that's all about death and isolation and dread and loneliness. And it just works. I just really like all of the vibes and the feelings that I got while watching this. Great production design. The look of the castle is pretty great. Great use of lighting and just harsh shadows, and everything is just kind of murky and filled with dread. I also love how quiet this film is too. It's interesting because, you know, the original film is a silent film, but of course it's accompanied by a musical score throughout the entire film, whereas this is, of course, a normal film with sound, but there is very little musical score, and it largely relies on prolonged sequences of silence or very soft, quiet sounds, and just normal kind of sound effects. But man, I thought the lack of score and the use of silence and just some of the sound effects, I thought they were implemented fantastically. Like just the sound of footsteps echoing throughout this cold, dark, grim castle. Something as simple as a footstep just adds something to this film. It just adds to the experience and the atmosphere. And I can't think of any other movie where I would compliment the sound effects of a footstep in a castle, but this is one of those movies. Just everything here contributes so well to the overall vibe of this thing. Like I said, there's two main highlights here. Number one is the atmosphere, which I just talked about. Number two is Klaus Kinski's performance as Count Dracula. My goodness, it just absolutely fantastic. I know what I'm about to say is going to sound like over-the-top hyperbole, but I'm telling you, his performance is captivating. I'm just like kind of sitting there waiting on bated breath every time he's on screen. And man, it's just fantastic. The performance here he has, it's so creepy. It's so unsettling. The scene where we're really kind of first introduced to his character, when Harker finally arrives at the castle and they sit down, it's late at night and they're having dinner. This scene is terrific. And it's really shot in a couple kind of longer takes, and there's no score. And mostly what we hear is just the sound of Dracula breathing. And just the sound of him breathing, it's creepy, man. The look of Kinski here is seriously unsettling and very off-putting. And man, it's so, so good. Again, it gives this sort of dark fairy tale, nightmarish type of vibe, how it's filmed and how they act in this scene, and just having these long takes and long prolonged silence where you're kind of just, it's almost this sense of like impending doom, like what's getting ready to happen. And just the dread here is just thick and so good. And man, every time Kinski is on screen, you just can't take your eyes off him. I love his performance in this. And his character here is interesting and more, I think, fleshed out and kind of developed compared to the original film, because this is, in a way, kind of more introspective, because they're looking at this guy like he is this cursed, being that he can't die. He can't die from old age. And he has just become this cold, isolated, lonely individual who is sitting there rotting in this castle all by himself. And it's just this interesting look at this type of creature. So what ends up happening, and you probably know the story, is Dracula sees a picture of Lucy, and so he ends up signing the papers to go to Wismar so he can live in this new castle that they have for him. And I like how the film kind of shifts gears here. And the second half, we get more of Lucy's character. And I like Isabelle Adjani's performance in this. And she's also kind of captivating. She's so pale. She looks like a ghost in this movie. But I just found her performance really interesting. And she's kind of this very intense, emotional, almost fragile, but also strong at the same time. And her performance is just really engaging, and I really like what she did in the role here. She gets really some good time to shine here in the second half of the film, but man, how everything kind of unfolds, it just does such a good job with this, again, this overwhelming dread and this impending, doom kind of feeling to it, especially in the latter half, once Dracula gets off the boat, and man, the rats, my goodness, the rats are everywhere, and he literally like brings the plague with him. And you get to this point towards the end of the film where it's like they're all bringing out caskets of dead bodies, out in the middle of the town square. And it's like this entire town has just become overtaken and consumed by death, completely surrounded by it. And there's dead people and dead animals all over the place, all brought on by Count Dracula, and I think that's ultimately what he represents. I really like what Herzog did here. I really like how he filmed it and how this story is presented, and just, again, the visuals and the atmosphere are fantastic, and I just really like what he did with it. This film really held up quite well for me. I also like the ending better here as well, as it ends on a more of a horrific, shocker, kind of downbeat of an ending, as what ends up happening is Harker succumbs to his neck bite and turns into the next Dracula, if you will. And so, yeah, good stuff, man. This is it's a good one. It's a very kind of unconventional horror film in terms of how it's shot. And so I'm just very curious. I can't wait to see what Eggers brings to this rendition and this story with his film. It's going to be very interesting to kind of look at all three of them after having seen his, to just kind of see the differences in styles and everything. But I'm very excited. Anyways, thoughts on this one? Final grade. I'm gonna give this one a solid 8 out of 10. I really like this one. It has just it's such a good, creepy, unsettling experience, the entire movie. So I really quite dug it. So hit me up down below like always. Let me know your thoughts on this one. Would be very interested in hearing from you. That's all I got. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.